Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome back to the Den of the Wonder. Today, I have another witchy book review. I really need to come up with like an actual name for this segment on my channel. Any suggestions? I'm totally taking them because I'm not very good at coming up with names. Puns, yes. Names, not so much. Unless it's for somebody else, then I'm pretty good with it. But now we're just bragging and there's no reason for that. So today I am reviewing Slavic Witchcraft, Old World Conjuring Spells and Folklore by Natasha Helvin. But before we jump into that, I thought you guys would like to know that the tea I am drinking today is Moroccan mint. It's being steeped ever so generously by my little sloth buddy here. And I'm also rocking my Batman cup, which is like my favorite cup because it's a sassy Batman cup. So, the most important things aside, this book, Slavic Witchcraft. So I picked this book up because I have been doing a lot more studying on traditional witchcraft and things like that. Root working, conjure, those are a lot of things that have been like catching my interest lately. So I thought it would be nice to try to see some different like witchcraft practices from parts of the world that I'm not particularly familiar with. Not gonna lie, I didn't really understand what the Slavs were. So I did some research and learned some things. I learned a lot about Russia that I had no idea about, and also their influence on other countries in the surrounding region, how far the Slavs spread. Really interesting stuff. I definitely recommend that you do a little research on your own if you aren't familiar with it as well. So when I saw this book on Audible, I was like, oh, I'm gonna get this because it's like so exciting to see like witchy books on Audible, and the more books that they add, the more excited I get. But also, just excited to see something a little bit different because there are a lot of like, not as a put down, but like fluffy bunny, new age sort of love and light books on Audible. I think they're a little more accessible for people, so they aren't nearly as intimidating as some more hardcore stuff, or just some more in-depth things, or maybe like off the beaten path, let's say. So there's a lot of those on Audible, so it's kind of like weeding through, the 200 moon magic books, which like you can only read so many books about moon magic, I think, unless you have the moon magic book that changed your life. I am very interested in it. Definitely recommend it in the comments below. But like I'm saying, there's not a lot of sort of offbeat or off-trend sort of books on Audible for magical pagan-y type folks. So I was excited to get this book. Now, you're probably all wondering, what rating am I going to give this book? Because I'm doing a lot of build-up and I'm not really talking about the book. Well, I haven't come up with a name for my arbitrary number system. Still taking suggestions for those below. I'm going to give it 3 whatevers. 3 whatevers. Because I like the book. I thought it was interesting. I'm not enamored with the book, though, so I don't want to say it's the top of my list or I found it super enlightening. I thought the parts to me that were the most valuable, let's say, was the actual beginning part of the book. I want to say like the first hour and a half, which I will say the thing I appreciated about this book was that the introduction was not 12 hours long. I always really appreciate that, especially when it comes to audiobooks. I think like I can deal with a longer intro when I'm reading it, but when I have to listen to it, I'm like, oh my gosh, please just get to the subject matter of this book and quit telling me your whole life story. But that's just me. I know some people like that kind of stuff. I am not into it. So this intro was pretty short, but it was pretty short. The beginning part of the book covers the lore and sort of history behind the gods of the Slavs, as well as their perception of sorcery and witchcraft, and the ways that they identified sorcerers, some of the old folk tales. There was some really interesting stuff that I hadn't realized, like you could tell a witch by her tail and her wooden leg, and sometimes she had a false eye, and then like there was a lot of things that came up sort of in like the Grimm Brothers stories when they tell you about the witch. I don't know if you guys remember that story. I don't know what it's called, so forgive me for once again not doing my research before I started. But there's a Grimm Brothers story about 2 little girls, and they're really naughty, and their mom's like, if you guys don't like knock it off, I'm gonna leave. And eventually she gets so fed up that she does, and then they get this horrible like witch of a mom who has a wooden leg and a bad eye, and like I think she's got like a hunch, like a humpback, and like a beaver tail, maybe, if I'm remembering it correctly. But she's like really awful, and eventually they like learn to be grateful and want their mom back so much that their mom finally comes back, and the like witchy mom disappears forever. So it's like a story to tell kids to behave themselves and be grateful for their parents. But like that story like came up suddenly when I was reading this book because of the way that the Slavs like identified witches, and I was like, oh, I've actually heard about that in this fairy tale by these German dudes. So I thought that was interesting, and I realized that there was a lot of parallels and things that had sort of cross culture, so to speak, to get all the way here to me. And there was just a lot of things about Slavic, like traditional Slavic magic or sorcery that I didn't realize that I was already acquainted with. So that was interesting to me. The reason I give this book 3 stars isn't because I felt like it lacks substance. The last chunk of the book is probably 5.5-ish hours, don't quote me, of spells. And there's a small bit at the end about working with the dead and spirits and ancestors and stuff like that. And it's like a thick, dense Book of Shadows type book. Like, there was a point where I was listening, and the first section of spells is like love spells, and it goes through like every sort of form of love spell imaginable, like crossing every sort of ethical line you could ever put up. There were lines that I thought like I'm cool with crossing. Turns out I'm not cool with crossing those lines. Some of the things I thought were a little interesting. Some of the other things I thought like were useful, or things that I could maybe not necessarily apply to my practice, but take elements of to my practice. So there was a lot of interesting stuff there. It was thick. It took like almost 2 hours to get through just the first part of love spells, and I was like, wait, are we still in the same chapter? Hold on, let me look at all the chapters. And so there's a lot of material in this book, but what there isn't a lot of is sort of that folkloric information that I find the most appealing. Like, I don't need so much information on just spell after spell after spell. I can sort of do without if I know the tenets or the core subject of something. So for this book, the beginning was actually just too short for me. Like, there wasn't enough about the mythology, so I was a little confused as to what it had to do with the overall picture and how that applied to the traditional magic that they practiced. I wish that she had gone more in depth on the deities, and there were some deities that she talks about, but they never get mentioned again, and then vice versa. They come up later on, like Chernobog comes up later, and I was like, wait, I know Chernobog because, like, American Gods fans, if you're there, you know who Chernobog is. But then I was like, tell me more about like the whole myth surrounding Chernobog and how it applies to the witchcraft element, and that wasn't there at all. So I think just for me personally, I didn't get as much out of this book as I would have liked to have gotten. Also, because it's a sort of dense Book of Shadows, sort of spell guide to Slavic witchcraft. There isn't a lot of information as to why certain things are done certain ways. It's just sort of like, here's a spell, here's a spell, here's a spell, here's a spell, and here's a list of things you need. And there's some things, like some superstitious things that never get explained. Like, you need to go to the store, you need to buy like 7 different size needles and pay with cash, and you can't take any change back. So, refuse your change. And I was like, okay, but why though? So, it was kind of stuff like that. There were certain things that would come up that were superstitious, and I was like, where does the superstition come from? What's the relative, like, nature of it? Like, what does it mean? Tell me. But, like, that never happened in the book, so that was a little disappointing to me, and I think it's because if I had wanted to pursue this more, I needed more to go off of, to be like, I need to do more research, or I need to get more involved in Slavic witchcraft. And I'm sure that there are other books out there. I will definitely look for some, because I am interested in learning a little bit more about it, and not having this be my only entry into this sort of branch of magic. But overall, I mean, it was good. There was a lot of things you could take away. The prosperity spells were interesting. There's a lot of little ideas, I think, in the book, especially in the spell section, that can be easily adapted to your personal practice. And if you are interested in Slavic witchcraft, this might be like a good accompaniment to like another book that has more of the traditions and mythos behind it. If that's what you're looking to get. Like, so I would look for a more foundational book, or just a book on Slavic mythology would be a really good way to start before, and then take this with you as sort of a side piece to get some ideas on how to craft spells using the traditional witchcraft style is presented here. So yeah, I don't know if I would recommend this unless you were saying like you were already a practicing traditional witch of the Slavic tradition and wanted some ideas for spells. I think that would be the only time that this book would come up as a recommendation. Or if you were looking to do some more research and you wanted to bring this with you on your research. Also, the only time I think I would recommend it. Otherwise, as a standalone book, not my favorite book, not the worst book. It was well written. I did think that the audible narration, the lady that they picked, was kind of an older lady, and she had sort of a sleepy voice, like a grandma kind of reading to you, you know, like a bedtime story. So that made it a little difficult, which is also why I was like, how long is this chapter? Why are we still here? Because I was getting a little sleepy, guys, like, to be honest. So, not that I thought it was boring, just like very soothing voice. So keep that in mind if you are, especially if you're one of those people who needs a more like poppy narrator to stay awake during audiobooks or easily falls asleep while listening to other things. Maybe get the actual physical book for this if you are interested. If you have read this book or any other books on Slavic witchcraft, I would be interested. Sound off below. Is this a tradition that you practice? I would also be interested in knowing more about it from you, and maybe some resources that you use. So let's carry on the conversation in the comments below, and I will catch you all next time. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. Happy travels. Bye.